Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second panel on epistemology and the foundations for pluralism in the ninth creative theory colloquium. I thank Professor Chandok for bringing up the ideas of duality, dichotomy, and plurality to the fore. I think when we think about colonialism, this dichotomy of the self and the other, the subject and the object, the self and the other subject and the object comes quite strikingly to make sense of our political, social, and experiential ontology. But when we think about an alternative and an act of thinking which is not so dualistic, maybe, I think that non-dualist method or that non-dualist outlook is yet to manifest in the same experiential ontology that we have been talking about. So coming to our panel, I'll take a brief moment to introduce the panelists before inviting Professor Veeravalli to illuminate the idea behind the panel. Ma'am is a former faculty, Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. The chair, Professor V. Sujata from Center for Study of Social Systems, has kindly consented to also make insightful interventions as our discussant. Our speakers, Dr. Shraddha Shah, teaches philosophy at Hindu College, University of Delhi. Dr. Inamur Rahman is a faculty, Philosophy Department, Presidency University, Kolkata. And Mallikarjun Nagral is a research scholar at School of Interdisciplinary Research, IIT Delhi. It is a common interest for epistemological inquiry into the dynamics of philosophy, science, politics, and technology that brings the panel together. Thank you all for joining. All speakers shall have 15 to 20 minutes to present their respective propositions, followed by discussion and reflections upon questions. Now, I request ma'am to brief us upon the theme. Thank you.
Yes, I'm truly happy to be part of the Creative Colloquium. For some years, I have been, as I said, welcomed to this forum, and I look forward every year for the 5th of September to be again with my friends. Yes, I will start with my discussion, and basically I am introducing my panelists and giving you a context to why I think the panelists' contributions are of utmost significance. Partly, Professor Mohanty has already initiated the discussion by saying how our response to our own critiques has been insufficient in terms of presenting a positive other point of view which can contend with the dominant points of view. So I will start with my talk now. Shiv Vishwanathan has coined a term, cognitive justice, which draws attention to the fact that modernity, with its scientific rationalities of development, progress, and freedom, ironically enough, tramples on all other forms of life, methods of organization, production and reproduction, and notions of well-being. Cognitive justice is a plea for differing worldviews with fundamentally different epistemological and metaphysical presuppositions governing the vocabulary and mechanics of thinking itself, to be recognized and given a chance to coexist with forms and norms of modern scientific rationality. The story, however, is not that simple. Take, for instance, GM seeds, genetically modified seeds. Once you sow them in a field, they will let no other natural seed of the crop survive. Cross-pollination slowly but surely engulfs and conquers field after field, erasing the possibility of any cognitive justice or any choice left in the matter. We become GM seed dependent for life. The structure and syllabi of the university, our modes of production and reproduction, our goals of science, religion, and politics are informed by a similar regime. The seeds of modernity and scientific rationality are sown so deep in our consciousness and intellectual life that they not only set the norm and criteria of excellence and competence, but form an element of intellectual aggression that seeks to organize and civilize society with its theory of rationality and rights. It is the old Hobbesian theory, perhaps in new form, which rules out self-governance, self-reform, and service as the original foundations of civil society. It is the same division between reason and experience which rules out human reflection in epistemology. This has to do with the universalist presuppositions of modern scientific rationality that by definition rules out the possibility of fundamentally different cultural rationalities and systems of thought. For instance, our chairperson Sujata works on indigenous medicine systems and the difficulties of this system even beginning to survive in the context of not just modern life, but modern epistemologies. Those that do not conform can only be irrational, unemancipated, and evil. Insofar as this is so, the believer in scientific rationality can be as rabid as a fundamentalist bigot, hegemonic and dismissive of the future of any other system of thought. It could be irrational, ethical, spiritual, aesthetic, but not systematic or scientific, exactly as Gandhi has been classified in the modern world. So they would allow that alternative systems can be anything else but have any contribution to the cognitive enterprise, to the knowledge enterprise. So we come to value productivity over nurture, efficiency over craft, the standard over the non-standard, freedom over conscience and community, equality over complementarity, and solidarity over sovereignty of the individual. So most of our critiques are critiques uh, as it were, the existing dominant regime of politics and economics, but not really on what else one can offer. There seems then to exist an inherent antagonism between the concepts of reason and freedom at the heart of democracy. No less a thinker than Kant in his essay on perpetual peace holds that peace is not a condition established by the moral disposition of man, but a policy induced by reason in the face of man's natural self-seeking propensity. And I would add here that this natural self-seeking propensity in modern democracies has been sanctified in the rights to self-preservation, property, and liberty, that is by the very institutions of democracy. And Kant adds in his essay on perpetual peace that it suits democracy to encourage these self-seeking propensities as an aid to reason for the purposes of counseling peace, so that the more the unrest, the more the need for rationality to take over. And of course, we immediately sense and see and recognize how this rationality is used by the state. I would urge ourselves to consider that more than the state, it is the expert who has the reins of rationality in his hand. So it is the expert in every field may it be of science, of religion, of politics, who brings this rationality with an aggression to, as it were, erase any other possibility for the future. Because things have been raised about, I have some time, Rashi, a minute?
Sure, ma'am.
Yeah, about the relationship between state and religion. My student Mallikarjun, who's also one of the panelists, brought my attention to Professor A.K. Saran on this issue. He has a short paragraph, and I would like to conclude by reading from this text of Professor Saran. It is on the state and the sacred. So it is on regnum and the sacerdotia. All over the world, the mainstream academia, indeed the entire intellectual life, does not participate in the sacred, which indeed is officially ignored, if not rejected. It remains unquickened, barren, cutting itself willfully off from the life-giving principle. In a word, it is dead today. Indeed, the sacerdotal stands today undetermined and eliminated. Modern scientific establishment, and indeed all intellectual life, becomes essentially and necessarily an underling, virtually a stooge of the political economic establishment. Whatever its trapping of freedom and autonomy, whatever its commitment to independent social criticism and to liberating and revolutionary science. Today, the intellectual is widely defined as a social critic, his role being seen essentially as that of the dissenter. If such a self-definition of the intellectual life makes sense at all, it is only because we live in fallen times. Criticism is not guidance any more than dissent is vigilance. From commentary to criticism, or even critique, what a humiliation. We have, by a long betrayal, lost our vocation. In the name of intellectual freedom, we have cast ourselves as dissenters and rebels. And I think I will end with the plea that we meditate on this statement of Professor A.K. Saran, because I think this is perhaps gives us one clue to this sense of the insufficiency of our response to the challenge of authoritarianism and hegemony that today presents itself to us. Thank you. My panelists will I think, focus on an attempt to demonstrate that it is not power that rules the possibility of thought or thinking, but it is regimes of epistemology that govern knowledge systems and therefore govern the vocabulary and mechanics of thinking itself. And therefore, starting with Shraddha, examples of how these regimes govern our very ways of thinking. Shraddha will present on the question of epistemology, Inamur on politics and political theory, and Mallikarjun on the question of machinery and technology. Thank you very much.
Okay, should we begin? Yeah. So thanks,
yes, ma'am.
Anuradha. Thanks, Creative Theory Colloquium, for giving me an opportunity to chair this session, the theme of which is very close to my heart, and it's only very appropriate that this whole idea about future of thinking begins with a panel on epistemology and the foundations of pluralism, where, as Anuradha, my friend and colleague, who put it very clearly, that if we are looking for power external to this episteme, that's one thing, but the focus of this panel is that power is intrinsic and embedded in the episteme itself. And the three papers that go into the panel will be addressing in a very insightful way. I got the papers in advance yesterday, so got an opportunity to read them. So they complement each other and cover different dimensions and make the argument in whole as to how the power is embedded in the episteme itself. It is intrinsic to it, and how that could be understood and what are the alternatives. So without losing much time, I'll invite the first speaker, Shraddha Shah. She is teaching in Hindu College at New Delhi since 2018. She completed her PhD in the philosophy department of Delhi University, also undertook a semiological analysis of labor, an interesting PhD thesis, and has since been working on social political theory, epistemology, and on themes that give an interface between pluralism and monism. So on to you, Shraddha. You can take about 15 minutes to make your presentation. And I'm sure for those who are very interested in the work of these panelists, these papers will be made available in the website or in the booklet. They are full papers for your reference. Shraddha, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
So thank you to the Creative Theory Forum for giving us this opportunity. Since we've already initiated this discussion on thinking and the freedom to think, and also Dr. Veeravalli has clearly set out the agenda for a panel, my paper is essentially on methodology. So when we talk about thinking, we're essentially talking about, at least philosophically, we're also trying to determine what method of thinking do we espouse in terms of saying what knowledge is. So my paper consists of three parts. The first part of the paper deals with the rationalist positivist methodology. And for that purpose, I primarily look at Descartes and his description of the method. The second part of the paper deals with the semiological method and worldview, which I take from J.P.S. Oberoy's work. And the third is a sort of comparative analysis from the semiological perspective of the positivist rationalist method as discussed in Descartes' method. So starting with my paper, my key assertion with regards to the Cartesian method is that we often tend to critique the metaphysics, that is, there is mind-body dualism, but nonetheless, we tacitly accept the method that has been espoused by Descartes. So what I am going to try and demonstrate is this method and try and argue how that pervades every aspect of our analysis, whether it's the arts, whether it's politics, whether it's religion, ethics, or even the very conduct of life. And for that, we need to closely look at the Cartesian method. Descartes' method, in a very preliminary manner, has two basic rules, or actually there are four rules, but they're divided into two parts. One is the analytic part and the other is the synthetic part. As far as the analytic part consists, he argues that there must be no presuppositions before we undertake any study. We must question all our prejudices. We must begin almost as if from scratch. And we must break down each problem into indubitable simples. Now, each of these, one can go into a discussion in order to elaborate how these are extremely problematic steps, though they seem to be fairly given, because what I am going to argue is that this reduction of issues into simples, as well as starting from this position of no presuppositions, in itself is a presupposition which assumes the mind-body dualism. The second part of the method, which is the synthetic method, again consists of two parts. One is that thought ought to be directed in an orderly manner by beginning with the simplest and then moving on in terms of what is given to a more complex formulation of the problem. And the second one, which is something very interesting, is where he says that we need to make enumeration so complete and review so comprehensive that I could be sure of leaving nothing out. So these two parts again seem to be very, very given and absolutely easy to understand. However, the question that comes up is when he's talking about this order and he's talking about enumerating these symbols, what does this really entail in terms of the implicit metaphysics? And here I argue is where the Cartesian mind-body dualism comes in. And he doesn't necessarily speak of the order by way of which we must proceed as far as his discourse on the method is concerned, but in his principles of philosophy, he says that the basis of all our correct judgments and the order in which to proceed must be clear and distinct perceptions, which is clearly suggestive of a mind-body dualism, because perceptions may be clear, but they may not be distinct. And the example that Descartes takes is that of pain. So we may feel pain very, very clearly, but it's not something that is distinct. And in his sort of classification, where things are either, where all objects of knowledge are characterized as things and their affections or as eternal truths, pain, color, passions do not find a place. He relegates pain, color, and passions, which are essentially relational categories, especially this is going to become more clearer when I discuss the semiological worldview. But his argument is that when we look at these categories, they are largely figments of our mind, or they're perhaps not figments, but these are part of our consciousness. And it is here that we can then, need not take account of the body, because the body in the Cartesian framework has been relegated to the external world. And pain, sensations, color, all are just aspects of our mind, where we cannot give a relational role to pain, which also, I mean, if we analyze it from any other framework except the clearly dualist, pain also has a physical location. It's something which has an objective substrate, which Descartes clearly dismisses. And the example that he takes up for this is the phantom limb pain. So this is the two key issues that emerge from an assessment of the Cartesian methodology is one, that we need to break each thing into simples, indubitable simples, and the other being to make enumerations so complete that we don't miss anything out, a sort of comprehensiveness of data. The other very, very significant part is to eliminate individual perspective. Knowledge has to be certain, and for knowledge to be certain, it's a taint on it to consider any individual perspective weighing in on what constitutes knowledge. Now, to understand this further and to sort of contrast this with the semiological worldview, I'll first discuss what the semiological worldview is. And here I take it from J.P.S. Oberoi's writing, particularly Science and Culture, and some bits from European modernity as well. So in his book, Science and Culture, J.P.S. Oberoi argues that there's a demonstrable set of relations between God, man, and nature that allow an evaluation of the nature and character of any civilization and its various parts, which includes its science, politics, and culture. It is the whole that would explain the parts, including science, and not vice versa. These relations would be instantiated and negotiated afresh by each civilization, nation, or an age. However, this negotiation would presuppose answers to the fundamental questions of ontology, what is man, epistemology, what is truth, and cosmology, what is the world or reality. So it is in the framework of these fundamental questions that the relations between God, man, and nature would be negotiated. And this is the fundamental framework for the semiological worldview. In Oberoi's analysis, the fundamental basis of the semiological worldview is based on key terms like wholeness, structure, symbols, and dialectics, and would be the science of forms, structures, and relations. These terms are part of the larger semiological method, which sees the universe or a part of it in terms of interrelations between individual signs and the universe, or a part of it in terms of the interrelations between individual signs and the larger system and the cosmos which they occupy. Now, the key issue that emerges is what is a sign? And here, it's something that needs to be contrasted from the Cartesian simple, because sign essentially is a triadic structure of interrelations where the opposing elements are mediated or integrated by a third entity, which has the aspects of both without being reduced to either. And the key example that Oberoi argues here is the human body. And this is a very interesting formulation of the human body. The human body may be seen as a part of the external world where it can be known by the mind subjectively, as well as being that part of the self that can be known objectively. This articulation of the concept of the human body highlights the language of symmetry, which he argues is something which is espoused by both the positivist tradition as well as the Hermetic tradition. But in the positivist tradition, symmetry is reduced to homogeneity and heterogeneity, whereas in the Hermetic tradition or this larger semiological worldview, it is spoken of in terms of correspondence and complementarity. Correspondence are relations of similitude, complementarity are relations of difference. And he argues further that complementarity is something, or relations of similitude are again what have been emphasized, even with thinkers within the European regime who sort of engage with this tradition, whereas relations of complementarity have been largely ignored. And he sort of seeks to emphasize those relations. He has another very interesting quote on the senses. So he says the human senses, far from being merely windows on the world, are the artifacts of mind and labor that mark the frontier and mediate between the facts of the external world and the categories and values of the mind. By the frontier here is meant that point of conjunction and disjunction across which is established the unity and variety of the eye, the mind, and the hand, or the faculties and the experience of perception, cognition, and volition, or of self, world, and the other. So all of these dialectic are important in terms of the constitution of knowledge itself. And here, the human body or the human senses act as the fulcrum for this mediation. In the semiological worldview as presented by Oberoi, the individual perspective is central, and as such, that is precisely what the positivist method seeks to eliminate in its quest for certainty and objective knowledge. The individual subject and his perspective have a precise configurative role to play. Unlike the modern positivist science, where the acme of perspection is considered the ability to produce facts that are immune to the deficiencies of the human observance and provide objectivity, a semiological science necessarily goes on to affirm that each so-called fact is value-laden at one and the same time, and that there is a constant dialectic between the world and the observer, which cannot be held separate interminably. We might do so in a logical, abstract manner, but in the very process of knowledge, we cannot separate the observer from that which is being observed. And he argues that two fundamental, so to speak, requirements for the semiological method are the unity and variety, or the variety of interrelations of the whole and the parts, and the dialectical relation between the subject and the object. These are integral to constituting the semiological method. The semiological method would hold that although different signs hold different messages, however, underlying them would be similar structures of signification between parts and whole in all the parts. For a semiologist, the whole would always be more significant than the parts, and it is essential to note that the whole here is not in terms of a comprehensive enumeration of each feature, but in terms of seeing all things in the round. This is in complete distinction, obviously, from what I've been saying with regards to the Cartesian method, that we enumerate everything separately and discretely. In fact, this is necessarily accounting for all the interrelations in terms of a holistic picture. Now, I did look at Foucault's sort of description of the 16th century episteme in the order of things, but I'm going to sort of skip that for now because I think I would move to the last part of my section, given that I have limited time. But just something that I'd like to say with regards to that is that with Foucault, this description of the 16th century episteme highlights this key aspect of the interpretation of science. And one of the implications of his theory is where he argues that divination and erudition were both considered to be knowledge at par. Not that divination was something which was irrational or just magical in nature and therefore superstitious. The way in which he describes the episteme, and unlike Oberoi, he doesn't necessarily see it as a method, and also doesn't necessarily account for the individual perspective here, but he nonetheless charts out the various relations in terms of the theory of signification in 16th century Europe. And his key assertion is that these knowledge systems had their own basis and were not regressive, or they were not just superstitious or magical, and therefore to be relegated outside of the framework of knowledge. I now move on to the third section of my paper, which is essentially where I look at the implications of the positivist method from the point of view of the semiological worldview. In the light of the discussion of the semiological method and worldview, we can now discuss the implications of the dualist method and worldview. Oberoi says that the semiological worldview classified the sciences in a hierarchy in terms of spirit, mind, life, and matter, respectively. That is, the highest and more perfect realm being that of the spirit, and encompassing within it, so on, the lower and the less perfect sciences, conceptualized somewhat as concentric circles. So the largest circle being that of spirit, and subsequently life, matter, following within that circle. Under the positivist method, the order of precedence is reversed, and the lower level becomes the ruling and foundational basis for the higher levels. In fact, the higher levels are regarded as simply a more complex form of the lower levels, which makes them almost optional as opposed to the essential position they held in the earlier classification. So this is, a direct result of breaking down each problem into indubitable simples. Now, one could very well go into the possibility whether something like this is possible, but in just this exercise of breaking things down into their absolute simple parts without connections to the whole, it's almost like you can never get to the higher level, although there's always the larger impending promise that perhaps it will be done. The other implication was that the modern scientist moved from the part to the whole. The essential link between the part and the whole as complementary to one another stood broken, which Oberoi notes led to a divide between the empirical scientist and the poet or the mathematician, where there could be nothing in common between the two. For one, observation of the object system was reserved, whereas for the other, free creative thought. But the grounds that enabled the observations and the creativity to come together was lost. The mode of interaction between the parts and the creative whole became an imposed relation, and not one of complementarity or compossibility, something that he instantiates through his analysis of J.W. Goethe's theory of color. He demonstrates, and it's a very complex demonstration, one I don't think I'm fully at grips with, but nonetheless, he argues that under the positivist dualist regime, Goethe's theory of color is considered significant in terms of its literary or imaginative value, but has no value as a scientific theory of color. These sorts of developments where you separate the creativity from the science leads to a class of modern specialists who know more and more about less and less, and the lay person thereof was just left to observe and unquestioningly accept the word of the specialist, and was guaranteed no place and agency in terms of knowledge classification, which is what his key thesis is, that it's the expert in each field who determines what rationality is or what knowledge is, and there's no say for the lay person to participate in any of these knowledge systems. He further notes that the unity of human knowledge dissolved with the ascendance of the positivist method. The lower sciences, or the sciences of matter, were considered inherently independent from the higher disciplines, and with it, the authority of the higher disciplines to integrate human knowledge was also forsaken. God was categorically removed from the world, put in heaven to rule, devoid of any real interest in the world, and thereby the epistemic upshot being the removal of one axis of the semiological method. Then on each of the special sciences had their own set of observations and theories, with only commonality being the formal aspect of the positivist method underlying them. There was formal homogeneity between the disciplines, but their ability to be able to talk about a shared reality was lost, with a forever impending promise for a future unification. There is a demiurgic proclivity in the way in which the modern man sees his relation with the world, in the absence of God, with dire implications for both human society as well as the natural world. I'd like to end from a quotation which I have taken from A.K. Saran's The Traditional Vision of Man. It's actually a quotation that he takes from Dostoevsky from The Possessed, but I'd like to read this out. You ape, you assent to get the better of me. Hold your tongue, you won't understand anything. If there is no God, then I am God. There, I could never understand that point of yours. Why are you God? If God exists, all is his will, and from his will, I cannot escape. If not, it is all my will, and I am bound to show self-will. Self-will, but why are you bound? Because all will have become mine. Can it be that no one in the whole planet, after making an end of God and believing in his own will dare to express his self-will on the most vital point? It's like a beggar inheriting a fortune and being afraid of it and not daring to approach the bag of gold, thinking himself too weak to own it. I want to manifest my self-will. I may be the only one, but I'll do it. Do it by all means. I am bound to shoot myself because the highest point of my self-will is to kill myself with my own hands. Thank you. I'd like to end my presentation with this. Okay.
For putting these complicated ideas in a concise manner. You had to deal with Descartes and then deal with JPS and touch upon Foucault. So I think you've done a reasonable job of covering all the key points. We'll take it up for discussion soon. So let me invite the second speaker, Inamur Rahman, who is teaching in Presidency University, Calcutta. And he completed his PhD on the theme of his PhD topic from Aligarh Muslim University is theories of global justice and the problem of global poverty. And he has since been working on issues of multiculturalism, epistemology, philosophy, and ethics. And by way of complementing the first presentation, I think Inamur Rahman will focus on dualism and absence, the issues around pluralism in political theory. So Inamur, off to you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you, Creative Theory Colloquium, for giving me an opportunity to present my paper. First of all, I want to say that Happy Teachers Day to all of my teachers here. And yeah, I have tried to ground. I have tried to ground the dominant notion of justice, or I have tried to understand the dominant notions of justice, like, for example, Rawls' theory of justice within the context of a larger epistemic framework. So in starting, like, my paper will be largely, what I'll be doing in my paper is like this. I'll try to show that how Rawls, though he categorically he says that the principles of justice in the process to arrive at principles of justice is not a business for epistemology, but I will try to show that how that is rooted in a certain framework of epistemology. And then I try to show that how Plato in Republic is kind of presenting us with an alternative view of justice, of the epistemological framework, and the relation between them. So primarily, I have focused on Rawls's method to arrive at the principles of justice, and I am not going into the other parts of it. I'll just try to the method that Rawls has formulated, and that method is being called that the Rawls says that it is the process, it is the procedure that makes a that helps us to arrive at a principles of justice, arrive at a principle of justice which is just, which is objective in nature, right? And thus he says that it is the veil of ignorance which helps us the most to arrive to that kind of a principle, which everyone, every person, or like which is universal in nature, so everyone can conform to. And in the very method, he actually, the input of that very method, he actually tries to say that it is Kant's constructivism. He has one article called Kant's moral constructivism, where he says that the very, it can be the method, the understanding of a person we can construct it, we can constrain it as well, so that we can achieve a just principle, or we can achieve a universal or objective principle for justice. So he starts with like the veil of ignorance, as you all know, I think, that that there he starts with constraining the individual. right? The primary thing he is doing there is that universe, the individual, the person or the participant in the contract will they will not be having all the knowledge which a normal person can have in the outer world, right? So knowledge means the knowledge of situatedness, knowledge of like what religion or what caste he or she is belonging, everything. The knowledge of situatedness is being withdrawn from the person, right, in that process of veil of ignorance. And he says that he retains in the like within the veil of ignorance, he retains that the person will be a rational person. I feel that that cannot be challenged. My rationality cannot be challenged because already Descartes has told us that it is your doubting or your doubting itself will be validated that you are a thinking being. So your rationality will cannot be challenged, because being a rational being, you also prove that your existence. So you cannot challenge yourself. You can challenge all the other situatedness. You can challenge your body politic as well, but you cannot challenge your own self. So Rawls is trying to say that our rationality must be retained within the veil of ignorance, where everything else can be forgotten. So forgotten in the sense Michael Sandel says that it's a state of amnesia, momentary amnesia you have to be when you are inside the veil of ignorance. Now Rawls is saying that when we are in that process, we have another two things that we will be having. One is a moral sense, and another that I have a sense of justice as well, right? And in saying that that I have a notion of good or a notion of morality, Rawls is very particular that what kind of morality I'll be having within the veil of ignorance. And he's saying that he is giving us a clue that what kind of notion through which I will be functioning, right? So he's saying that within inside the veil of ignorance, a participant will always choose a wider liberty and opportunity and a greater rather than a smaller share of wealth and income. So this is a quote from Rawls. And he tries to say, and he tries to define that what kind of morality will be retained there. He's saying that he tries to define it by stating the morality, notion of morality. He says that thus something is being good is it's having the properties that it is rational to want in things of its kind, plus further elaboration depending on the case. So what Rawls is doing here is that Rawls's notion of morality can be understood in this way: action, person can be considered as good if it meets what is rational to want in them. Human virtues like kindness, being courageous, truthful, honesty, being righteous or just can be seen as good if these virtues are rational to want in person. Whether being a good person is a good thing, it is a sentence that Rawls has used. Whether being a good person is a good thing for an individual or not is entirely dependent whether being good is rational or not. So he is locating the notion of goodness within the notion of rationality only. Then he says that with this kind of the feature of person, where I am a rational being, where I will be choosing the most effective thing most effective plan among other plans, I will be having this kind of notion of morality, where I will be locating my goodness within the framework of rationality. Rawls is saying that you will be choosing the two principles of justice, that is the first principle, that is the liberty principle, and the difference principle. Now my point is that Rawls, first of all, what he is doing in this method is constraining an individual from going, like from deviating from what is the plan. Because Rawls primarily said the plan that it is your plan to arrive at objective principles of justice. And Rawls also diminishes any possibility to have an alternative sense of plan, because he is trying to set up that if all things remain same, then we will only be arriving at a principle of justice. And the principle looks like this. Now the point is that how Rawls is actually able to imagine that this kind of a methodology is possible within the realm of within the political domain. And that's where I found that Descartes is relevant. And I am not going into the into how Descartes has formulated the notion formulated how knowledge works, but I will try to inculcate one point here, and that is, and try to connect it with Rawls, and that is when Descartes is actually separating the mind and the body in the process of knowing the certain truth. And Descartes is saying that that is the only process to know, to reach to a certain truth. And for Descartes, it is the mind which is self-validating. Self-validating means Descartes has make a distinction between understanding and imagination. And he says that for distinct and clear knowledge, which is the understanding part of anything in the world, the mind turns itself towards itself. And on the other hand, when the imagination part, the mind turns towards the body. And he says categorically that the body always produces obscure and confused knowledge. So we need to separate the body in order to arrive at a principle which is, again, like Rawls, objective and universal, or you can say a certain truth. So he categorically makes this distinction, and he says that true knowledge of these belongs to the mind alone, but not to the composite. So not to the mind body. But but the point is that the body is something which prevents us from having certain knowledge. That is, like within the Descartesian framework, body is something which prevents us from certain knowledge. But body is something which actually situates us in the world. So separation of mind and body implies a separation of mind and the world, or mind from the world. This separation allows the mind to work and function independently and makes it possible to construct the world independently and objectively. Exactly in the similar way, Rawls is framing his veil of ignorance, where he is saying that it is our rationality who will be independently of my situatedness, will be framing a theory of justice, which is universal and objective in nature. Then I'll try to say that what kind of implication this kind of method and the implication of this kind of theory of justice is having in our world. So the Rawlsian justice, when Rawls is saying that we can arrive at a principle of justice without having any concern of my situatedness, riding on a conception, on an epistemology that Descartes has provided, Rawls is actually presuming, or Rawls is conditioning it, that strict conformity, like strict, I'm saying strict because Rawls has used the word strict conformity to the principles is required, or one of the fundamental things for preserving justice in the society. So there is no alternative way Rawls left for us to engage with the world or to understand the political scenario in the world. So there is one thing that you go through a process that is already being set. You will arrive at a principle of justice, and you have to conform to it. So compliance to the objective principle is one of the fundamental things that Rawls is formulating in order to prevail justice in the society. So you're being just as a person, you're being kind as a person or honest, doesn't matter for, or doesn't require for, a justice to be prevailed in the society. So, and that actually perpetuates a kind of dichotomy within the self, the dichotomy of like a dichotomy of being and doing. So, and the private and public, like how the dichotomy is being perpetuated there, because the theory of justice that Rawls has formulated only requires us to conform to the principles. But suppose I am being greedy. If I am a greedy person, being greedy is not a problem for Rawls, problem for Rawls's theory of justice. So if I am taking bribes or taking bribes, or I am being a corrupt person without being caught, that is not problem for Rawls's theory of justice. So I'm using the word corrupt here, maybe in a monetary sense, but corruption maybe we can understand it in a different with a different meaning as well. Corruption not only in the sense of taking bribes, but corruption in the sense of being being unjust or not being truthful to yourself. That can also be understood. So Rawls saying that Rawls's theory of justice cannot address that problem, and Rawls is only concerned about your public affairs rather than your private. How privately you are, that doesn't concern Rawls. So it is that duality, which actually that duality or the dual mode of being is there in our world, which actually sustains many kind of injustices in the political framework. And then I want to explore that how Plato in Republic actually tries to address this problem. So address this problem of a problem of that our present civilization is facing. The civilization is facing is like all the problems like starting from corruption to be or the environmental crisis as well. Now, starting Plato in Republic, the very question that start in Republic is with the nature of justice, how we can understand justice, what justice is, right? So, and Plato says that it is the virtue of the individual. So he posits justice within the individual rather than in the institution, which Rawls was doing. Rawls was saying that it is justice is a virtue of the institution. So Plato is saying that no, it is a virtue of the individual. And now when and he says that it is a virtue of the individual soul, making the whole exercise of who to be just or what is justice an internal matter to the person. And internal in the sense that he is not trying to find out that what acts are just. He is not trying to find out that conformity to which principle is justice, but he is saying that your being must be just. One, as an individual, a person needs to be within himself or herself, he or she needs to be just primarily. And he's in order to show that how a person can be just, he as we know that he talks about 3 parts of the soul and 3 parts of the state institution, right? So parts of the soul like reason part, courage part, and the appetitive part. So these parts can be seen as maybe contrary to each other. Reason might go with the appetitive part if we follow Descartesian method, right? So they are quite contrary to each other. But Rawls talks about them, and he was saying that harmony between all the parts of the soul makes a person just. And exactly in the similar way, harmony between all the parts of the state makes a state just. So here Plato puts it in this way, that we must remember then that each one will be doing his own business in the state, in the context of state actually. We must remember then that each one will be doing his own business and will be just when each part of him will be doing his own business in him. So Plato is saying that if the individual can retain or individual can maintain a harmonious soul, then only it will be possible to have an ideal state or have a just state. There is no other way to do it. One individual must have to be just within himself or herself in order to have justice in the society. So there is no it is not the top to bottom process where Rawls was saying that we need to frame a just principle, then people will be conforming to it, but it is the opposite of it. It is the individual who needs to be just, and with that justice will reflect in the society or in the state. So Rawls is saying that this harmony between each part of the soul enables a person to be just and to act just. So there is, and this is not vice versa, that you can act just but without being a just person. That cannot happen in Rawlsian framework, in Platonic framework. Plato says that in order to do good or in order to act justly, you have to be just first. Your being just followed, your doing just will be followed by your being just. So and then Plato posits this notion of harmonious individual being, or Plato connects it with its epistemology and metaphysics. Whereas Rawls categorically is saying that this is not a discourse of metaphysics and epistemology. Like the previous presenter was saying that they are choosing a path which is more convenient. So conveniency will be the deciding factor. Now Plato is saying that we need to understand the whole as a whole, that how the macrocosm and the microcosm is related, and he's saying that we need to have the grasp of truth in order to be in a harmonious state of being. And I have just skipped one thing, but I need to mention it, that in each part of the soul, or in each part of the, when Plato talks about each part of the soul or in each part of the being, he also talks about justice, something as doing its own duty. So each part will be doing its own duty, and thus and they will be they can sustain a harmonious being. Then so Plato actually yeah, I got the note, ma'am. I got the note. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So Plato says that it is the grasp of truth. The grasp of truth means Plato divides makes a distinction between being and becoming. Becoming, the sensible world; being, the world of forms. So Plato says the forms are the ideals. They are the ideals, or they are the unique. So, and we need to have a grasp of truth, or grasp of knowledge of the forms, in order to in order to have knowledge of the truth, you have to have the knowledge of the forms. And thus Plato says that bring in the process of dialectic. And dialectic, Plato says that through this, and he considers it at the highest most subject to be studied, or the topmost subject to be studied apart from any other subject. And he says that this dialectic method can actually invites us to engage with like in reference to his divide line, with the conjecture, then opinion, then understanding, and then knowledge. And Plato says that it is a process. It is a process through which individual has to go. Otherwise, it is a process which individual has to go. Otherwise, he will not be able to have the grasp of truth. And this Comfort says that this dialectic process itself gives you a synoptic view of the whole. Now, I just want to show that what is the difference between this process and the process that Descartes and Rawls was talking about. Just 1 minute. Yeah.
Up in the discussion for sure.
Yeah, surely, sure. So just to sum up, that this process of being just and in relation to the knowing the truth, and in relation to the form good, is what proposes an alternative to the method that Descartes has taken, where Descartes is entirely entirely separating the world from the individual, whereas Plato is saying that it is the concord between all part of the soul, and it is a engagement with the world through the dialectic which determines your truth, and which determines how you want to be a just person. And this actually can solve the problems like problems which are there, which problems like corruption. Problems like corruption, again, I have told you, corruption not in the monetary sense. It actually deprives your soul. Plato says it actually deprives your soul. And with one quote, I'll end from Plato. Just one quote, and I'll end this discussion. That a just person would be telling us we ought to do and say what will make our inside man completely master of the whole man. It is not the mind and body. And give him charge over the many-headed monster like a farmer, cherishing and tending the cultivated plants, but preventing the weeds from growing. He must be an ally of the lion's nature, and care for the whole creatures alike, making them friendly to each other and to himself. And so he will nourish the whole. Whole here is the cosmos. Thank you.
Thanks, Inamur, and sorry for interrupting you. If I were not the chair,
No, we have to
go on listening and get lost in the discussion. That was very good and insightful. Let me invite the third speaker, Mallikarjun Nagral. He's a doctoral student at IIT Delhi, and he's in the School of Interdisciplinary Research. And his project is in the area of philosophy of technology. He has already done his engineering in VIT Vellore and philosophy masters, and now pursuing his doctoral degree in philosophy with interest in epistemological and metaphysical foundations of social, political, and technological debates. So on to you, Mallikarjun, for your presentation on technology and politics of knowledge. You can unmute yourself.
Just a second, give me a second. Thanks a lot, Professor Sujata. Good afternoon, everybody. Now, first of all, I'd like to quickly thank the Creative Theory Colloquium for giving me this opportunity, and the coordinator, Dr. Veeravalli. And now, since the work is still in progress and I'm still working on it, so I'd be happy if today I can at least convey the broad thrust of my argument. Now, I'd like to begin the paper. So the existential threats posed by externalities associated with industrial mode of production have become hard to ignore. We have laid the blame squarely on social and socio-political wealth and power equations without substantial intellectual engagement with the realization that the precipice that we find ourselves is not owing to an aberration, but a culmination of a worldview, the very epistemological and metaphysical foundations on which our civilization rests. So now Shraddha has discussed the method already, and Inamura has discussed the implications for political theory. I'd like to discuss the implications of this epistemology and its inability to take account of relations and what it means for technological development. That throughout the world, industrial mode of production reigns supreme by thwarting all other possible alternatives is due to the force of this monocultural universal rationality, which dictates the norms of excellence, success, progress, and development. So technology is not just a value neutral, efficient means to an end, serving just narrow instrumental functions, but it also reveals a mode of engagement with the world and makes certain forms of life possible and others unviable, whatever be their merit. So technology expresses the truth of a relationship with the body politic, and cosmos or nature. Hence, I argue that it is important to address the design of machinery and its presupposition, as it forms a critical mode of mediation between man and nature, labor and capital, individual and society, and mind and body. The effort is just to relativize modern industrial technology as one form of technical organization, so as to recover a critical margin of maneuver to argue for a possible reform based on a fundamentally different technological rationality. Now, a space which is unavailable in the university and our higher technical institutes, except in sort of caricature forms where departments like value center, where then you have to discuss values separately apart from the technical matters. So I'd briefly like to set the problem. So in opposition to the Whig narrative, Marx's discussion on transformation from manufacture to industrial mode of production complicates the issue by showing that how machinery itself becomes a source of alienation. And this introduction of machinery is premised on sort of is tied to a transformation from subsistence to industrial mode of production, which itself is premised on a liberal theory of labor and property, according to which then labor is a means of self-preservation and accumulation of property, rather than a means of self-realization or communion with the world. So at the outset, this sort of an impoverished conception of human nature in terms of economic rationality sets the individual against society and informs the industrial machinery, which becomes the epicenter of producing hierarchical and hegemonical relations in the workplace and by extension in the society. I'd just like to briefly stress that this is not an anti-technology rant or a Luddite critique. It is neither a reactionary rejection of modern technology in general or a romantic plea for a regression for a primitive way of life. The problem is not modern technology or technology as a category in itself, but the subject-object, man-machine and man-nature, self and other relationship that guides the development of industrial machines and technology and its design. So we see that in industrial technology, then the focus is on efficiency, productivity, and control, instead of taking account of reproductivity, non-alienation, and sustainability of man-machine, man-nature, and mind-body relation. So the thinking about these problems basically has been limited to saying that, the problem of capitalism is rooted in surplus labor and its struggle with the capitalist rather than with capital itself. And hence they advocate for a fair distribution or a class struggle. So now liberal discourse does recognize the alienation involved in industrial mode of production, but they think that it is a necessary cost to be paid for the wealth of nations. Whereas the orthodox sort of Marxists, they exercise the early Marx and his design critique and turn him into a mere economist arguing for welfare state and better wages. But Marx himself says that an enforced increase of wages would be nothing more than better payment for a slave and would not win either for the worker or for labor their human status or dignity. Now, there are other arguments which say that we just need to limit the technological thinking to a certain sphere and let it not intervene in the cultural sphere. Obviously, that logic doesn't work. And another argument is about that how technology makes abolition of labor possible in favor of leisure time, and hence it is essential. I would say that this is a actually reactionary argument which arises only in opposition to the alienated labor, which is characteristic of industrial mode of production, which degrades and mortifies the mind and body of the worker. So Marx himself says that, that freedom lies not just in consumption, but the developing individuals' capacities and power to both produce and consume. So the model of freedom from labor then overlooks the problem of alienation, and the theory of complementarity of labor as the foundation of human society is replaced by, or which sees the labor as calling of human beings to be service of others, is sort of exercised. Like this is what Marx speaks of when he mentions species being, as Professor Thakur already touched upon. So it is this freedom and its possibility which is thwarted by norms set by industrial mode of production. Now, the critical theory, the latest approach of thinker Andrew Feinberg, who supplements the critique of instrumental rationality, which was put forward by Frankfurt School, he supplements it with recent studies in science, technology, society, discipline, and the social construction of technology to argue for a possibility of a different form of technical organization. So this approach basically argues that technology is underdetermined by purely technical factors. That means a particular problem has many technological solutions possible, and final solution rests with the social actors who are competing for meaning. So for example, that when machinery is introduced or technology is introduced, it is not technical criteria or technological rationality which decides its design, but it is actually the social interests which move it in a particular direction. So now, but in the final analysis, the best arguments assert that modern science and technology is fettered by capitalist interest, and once it is freed from it, this would help us mobilize and orient it towards more egalitarian and rational ends on which we can engineer the society. But in all, the emphasis is on politics rather than the structure of rationality or the epistemology, which itself informs technical horizon of engineering disciplines, and which then in later sort of determines our social relations. Now, I'd like to just discuss the presuppositions that inform this design. So I would like to say that modern industrial technology is not just a reflex of changing economic landscape as it is thought, or that it is just a logically upgraded version of technology that we had prior to pre-modern times, but that it marks a fundamental change in the philosophical worldview, which forms the horizon of our thinking itself and determines the economic, social, political, and technical thinking. So the separation of mind and matter, as already Shraddha touched upon it, it sort of fosters a disenchanted mechanistic worldview, which creates the conditions of possibility for technical action with disregard for nature. So man in this sort of epistemology stands outside nature and tries to sort of gain control over it. And he's no longer at home in the world. So earlier sort of the domestication principle turns into a domination principle. And so you can say that modern technological action is sort of premised on a forgetfulness of our ontological finitude, which induces a godlike delusion that we can intervene in the world without impunity, with impunity. So there's a thinker, Jeremy Nadler, who in his book, In the Shadow of the Machine, argues very interestingly that the Romans had pretty sophisticated mechanical arts for the time when their civilization was there, but they rarely applied it for industrial or production purposes. And he's thinking, why does it happen? And he concludes that it is because they didn't have the requisite worldview of disenchantment for such a thing to happen. Because for them, nature and cosmos was a living organism and was permeated by gods and spirits, and hence sacred. So this outlook sort of plays a considerable restraint to introduction of machines in place of human labor and unmediated relation to the world. So I think this is also what Heidegger refers to when he identifies that the essence of modern technology is actually enframing. That is, the will to power sort of speaks through our techniques, where nature and even human beings sort of are exposed to a functional gaze and mobilized for the advancement of techno-scientific progress. So our environmental movement is actually a symptom of this rationality at play. Now, furthermore, the dualism of theory and practice internally separates the relation between science and technology, where the former, fueled by curiosity, is concerned with study of nature in pursuit of value-neutral objective facts, and then technology separately decides matter of application. So when something goes wrong, the scientists can say that it's not us, it's the technologist, and technologists in turn can say it's not us, it's the politicians. So what happens, and within engineering discipline, what happens is then there is a further separation of the study of the subject and object. And then there's a separate science which studies the object and optimizes the object. Then you have your different engineering disciplines. And then you have a different study of the subject to conform it to the objective design of the machine. So you have your disciplines like operation research, industrial engineering, management, etc. So what the structure does is it creates the conditions for unbridled productivity, creativity, and technological innovation, as research is untethered from the relations with the body politic, and cosmos. So Oppenheimer sums it up very well when he says that when he's asked about his contribution to nuclear research, he says that when you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it, and you argue about what to do about it only after you had your technical success. So this method which prevails in our technical institutions controls the modes of classification and sets the standards and norms for what is developed, progressive, or cutting edge, and makes the other sort of modes of thinking or production completely irrelevant. Now, so the problems are latent in the method itself, and no amount of ethics for engineer courses can remedy any of it. So reason which was earlier sort of tied to contemplation of the ends and the harmony of means and ends is disjuncted and becomes a purely instrumental one, and becomes a tool, which value neutral tool, which can be applied for whatever purposes you need. So here Plato thinks that a techne, the ancient technological activity, is always related to virtue, and it is never separated from virtue. But what also the structure of technical disciplines does is that it would like to contrast it with what happened during India's independence movement, where there was a different journal of Khadi science set up, where the workers, since they were more, they knew how their technologies worked, and they made them, they could contribute to its improvement or not improvement, and they had their own say on the research also. So research becomes also decentralized, and sort of the hierarchy between lay and expert is sort of dissolved to an extent. Now, sort of control of nature also implies by extension control of men. So business or commerce following the narrow economic rationality of liberal theory, which already presupposes the dualism of self and other, sort of then guides the change in means of labor. So then our machinery has the capacity suddenly to enslave others. There is no restraint placed within it. So whoever owns the machine then exercises control over others. So just changing the owners wouldn't actually change, because ethics is not anymore external as an afterthought, but a particular ethic already speaks through the design of the machine and structures the society in particular ways. So Engels says it best when he says that the automatic machinery of a big factory is much more despotic than the small capitalist who employs the worker ever has been. So perhaps in non-dual presuppositions, the design would take into consideration the harmony of the body politic, because it would be based on a theory of human nature presupposed by, let's say, Marx's understanding of species being. So where your technology is not geared towards sort of reducing the other or in conflict with the body politic, but geared towards sort of helping you serve it. Now, the separation of mind and body forms the implicit ontological presupposition of modern machine design, which separates the indissoluble marriage between the hand and hand, which was characteristic of the production process for centuries. So now the machinery systematically de-skills the worker and makes him an appendage to the machine, and finally relegates him to insignificance as he just becomes a minder of the machine. So the separation of sort of operative and motive power established the division of labor in workplace, perpetuating the dualism and hierarchy of cognitive labor and manual labor, the expert versus lay, or the skilled versus unskilled in the workplace, and by extension in social relations. So I would skip a little bit and go to how sort of labor process changes. So it is also important to understand the implications of changing conception of nature also have for the craft or art of making itself. So Heidegger highlights the difference between poiesis, sort of, which is the mode of revealing which holds sway in crafts, versus manufacture mass production, to emphasize this difference. What he means perhaps is that crafts is not a case where the craftsman imposes the form on matter externally, but it is while careful handling of the matter itself that the form organically emerges. So the craftsman sort of nurtures the inherent vitality of matter and doesn't impose his own plans on it. Also, so since the object technology keeps getting optimized without limit, it determines sort of the trajectory of commerce, even military, etc., and which leads to absurd rates of obsolescence of technologies. And the user at the end is at total mercy of the producer. Now, it can be contrasted with convivial tools that Illich speaks of, which can be understood and repaired easily by workers, and they avoid being victims of sort of, this complexity and built-in obsolescence, which is characteristic of modern technology. So the production community, since it stays in control, its means of subsistence is not threatened. I think this is very evident in the farmer seed issue at play. And then the absurd rates of sort of obsolescence also creates a problem of waste. So here sort of the reproductivity and productivity principles have not been taken into account. Professor Sujata, do I have any time left?
I'm afraid you have to conclude. We'll
I can't
have
hear
some
you.
time for discussion. I'm saying you might have to conclude now. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Sorry.
No, I'm saying you might have to conclude now.
Yeah.
So that
I'll conclude.
we have some time for discussion.
Yeah. So I'd just like to conclude by saying that I have just tried to articulate the presuppositions underlying industrial machine design, which are relevant to our problems of inequality, alienation, and ecological crisis, in the hope of a redeemed future. The emphasis is itself that it's the design of technology which determines the nature of social relationships and politics and without addressing the underlying epistemology, the effort would not be very fruitful. And the comparison with crafts-based subsistence mode of production is not to discount or sort of ask to go back to some other era, but to uncover our changing understanding of who we are and how we engage with the world, which is revealed in our techniques. So yeah, I would just like to say what Professor Mohanty already said it so eloquently, that we need to first understand what kind of thinking we are under the grips of. So I know this kind of a critique immediately triggers anxiety that perhaps, like if we listen to this kind of mode of thought, we have to leave all our comforts and, go back to Stone Age. But it's not that, but we really need to understand what epistemology forms the horizon of our thinking. So yeah, the argument is not for a rejection, but a reformed scientific and technological rationality, which is based on different epistemological principles and which is employed in man's self-realization. Yeah, so I'd just argue that it is not a critique of technology as a category, that there is an interpretive flexibility within technology itself, which can be mobilized for a transformation in machine design to affect a possible civilizational change, which has to be based on a different technological rationality and a theory of human nature. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mallikarjun. Thank all the speakers for laying out, how the dualistic worldview, which all of them attribute to Descartes, at least the first two speakers, and how it is antithetical to pluralism. And this has been demonstrated with specific reference to the work of Descartes and with Rawls, and in the third presentation with regard to the very idea that is postulated between the subject and object in the case of modern technology. So it seems to us from this that non-dualistic worldviews are more plural. The dualistic worldviews that separate the mind and the body tend to be less plural. I mean, this is the sense that we are getting. And among the non-dualistic worldviews, whether it is J.P.S. Uberoy or Plato's approach, gives greater scope for pluralism. And why is that? It's because it emerges from these presentations that non-dualistic worldviews give greater scope for subjectivity and individual, without regarding subjectivity as a messy thing that cannot be handled, which doesn't have any reality or solidity or certainty about it. So this is achieved in the two cases, alternatives presented in the first two presentations, as allowing for unity in diversity. They don't amount to a cultural relativism, but where in JPS's semiological method, the body is foregrounded as a sign amidst a series of triads between God, world, God, man, and the world, or man and nature, and the self, other, and the world. A series of triadic relations are postulated in JPS's semiological method, in which the body is seen as a sign, which is at once both subjective and objective, in that it is a thing out there that can be visualized, which can be seen by the other, but at the same time something that can be experienced and is also the seat of perception and thought. And in the case of Plato's work, how the virtue or justice in one's own mind and how it doesn't remain a subjective and a private matter, because Plato enjoins that one's own truth is constantly correlated or seen to be corresponding to the form of truth prevalent out there, and is not seen. That is the way in which unity in diversity is postulated in these alternative ways of thinking that was proposed in the first two papers. And the third one, in which technology is being seen and critiqued, not so much for itself, but for the kind of interrelations it postulates between the subject and the object. Very interestingly, in Marx's Capital, he makes a reference to what is called the charka. He says, while distinguishing between the tool and machine, Marx says that tools involve human energy and machines involve artificial energy given from outside, whereas there is something in the Indian setting called the charka, which with one revolution of the hand entails 250 revolutions of that other thing, the bigger circle, and helps in spinning. He doesn't say it in so many words, but he says that charka is an between a tool and a machine, which is very intriguing. We don't find this subject being dealt with later in Marx in this. So the whole point is how the tool and the machine, the relationship between the craftsman and his craft and the product that is being produced. These are the things that were subject to question in the third presentation. So I have a few queries for the three speakers. And since we are running short of time, we started 12 minutes late. So I'm hoping I'll just post few queries and open the floor. To Shraddha, I would like to ask whether in JPS's semiological approach, you want to talk a little bit, even Marx spoke about men's relation to nature and men's relation to other men. Is there a synergy in the way JPS semiology looks at self, nature, and the world, or is it different for Shraddha? And for Inamur, I wanted to ask you, whether when you correlate Plato's notion of justice to the notion of fairness and roles, and Plato's doing one's own duty, do you think the correspondence that you are establishing is, are there commensurable concepts, is what I would like to ask you. And I have a couple of questions. Paucity of time, I'm just posing one question per speaker. And to Mallikarjun, I wanted to hear from you a little more on the idea of obsolescence, which is so central to this technology and the waste it creates. And secondly, whether you distinguish between technology and technocracy. This will be interesting if you can throw some light on this. With these comments, I open the floor to questions, which can be answered by the speakers. Yes, please, feel free.